In the early 1900s, the United States set out to accomplish what a failed French venture could not: carve a path between two oceans through Panama's dense jungles. In November 1903, just days after Panama declared independence from Colombia with covert U.S. backing, a landmark deal was struck. The Haibunau-Varilla Treaty gave the U.S. control of a 10-mile-wide strip of land across the isthmus in perpetuity in exchange for a $10 million payment to Panama plus yearly rent. The U.S. didn't technically own this canal zone, but it wielded all the rights, power, and authority within it, as if it were sovereign U.S. territory. American officials gained complete authority to build, fortify, and govern the zone, even threatening to withdraw protection from the newborn Panama if its leaders failed to comply. By May 1904, the U.S. had formally taken over the zone, and the monumental task of digging the Panama Canal began. Building the canal was an epic struggle against nature and disease. Steam shovels gouged earth, and thousands of laborers toiled under the tropical sun as dynamite boomed through the mountains. Workers battled floods, mudslides, and mosquitoes carrying diseases such as yellow fever and malaria. The human cost was tremendous. By the time the canal opened in August 1914, an official death toll counted 5,609 workers dead, of whom only 350 were white. The vast majority were black laborers from the Caribbean who bore the most dangerous jobs. Yet amid the hardship, an engineering marvel rose: a system of massive locks that lifted ships 85 feet, a shortcut between oceans that fulfilled a centuries-old dream. The first ship sailed through in 1914, just as World War I began, a testament to American ambition and technological might. With the canal complete, the Panama Canal Zone became a peculiar American colony in the tropics, a little America carved out of Panama. The zone ran from ocean to ocean, but was fenced off from the Republic of Panama, complete with its own police, courts, post offices, and schools. Thousands of U.S. citizens moved there to operate and defend the waterway, calling themselves Zonians. They built neat suburban towns with baseball diamonds and bungalows, planting imported roses in the yards. Over time, an American enclave society took root, one that was astonishingly insular and privileged. One U.S. official noted that many Zonians lived their whole lives in the zone's 10-mile-wide confines and had never set foot in the Republic of Panama, just beyond the fence. Anything outside the zone was a foreign land to them. Inside the zone, life could feel like a tropical slice of mid-century USA. Zonian families shopped at commissaries stocked with American goods and watched the latest Hollywood films at air-conditioned theaters. Diners served hamburgers and milkshakes, and U.S. holidays, such as the 4th of July, were celebrated with patriotic fervor. The enclave's infrastructure, from its libraries and churches to its well-manicured lawns, reinforced the feeling of being on American soil. But this comfortable life was built on stark inequalities that echoed the segregation back in the States. From the beginning, the Canal Zone enforced a strict racial and class hierarchy. Bylaws enshrined an almost apartheid-like system. Employees were divided into a gold roll of white and a silver roll of non-white workers, predominantly Afro-Caribbean migrants. White gold roll workers earned higher salaries, lived in better housing, and shopped in separate, better-stocked facilities. In contrast, silver roll laborers were given inferior accommodations and had their own segregated commissaries and clubs. Well into the mid-20th century, black and brown workers in the zone endured lower pay and open discrimination, even as their labor kept the canal running. Meanwhile, white Zonians enjoyed generous perks and a subtropical idyll, but remained ever wary of the surrounding Panamanian nation. For Panamanians, the zone's presence was a bitter insult. The U.S.-run territory cleaved their country in two, and many locals were barred from entering except as laborers or domestic help. By the 1950s, resentment had grown so intense that a barbed wire fence and concrete wall, derisively nicknamed the Fence of Shame, went up along parts of the border dividing Panama City. Ordinary Panamanian citizens often couldn't cross their own land without answering to American police. This reality fueled anger and nationalism among Panamanians, who saw the zone as a permanent occupation. Tensions simmered for decades as Panamanians pressed for greater recognition of their sovereignty, and Zonian authorities, backed by U.S. might, largely rebuffed them. On January 9, 1964, long-brewing frustrations exploded into violence. That day, now known as Martyrs' Day in Panama, a group of Panamanian high school students marched into the Canal Zone, carrying their flag, intent on raising it at Balboa High School to assert Panama's dignity. A crowd of outraged Zonian students and Canal Zone police met them. A scuffle broke out at the flag flagpole. In the chaos, the Panamanian flag was torn, an offense taken as a deep humiliation. The incident ignited 3 days of deadly riots. Enraged Panamanians poured into the streets on both sides of the zone's boundary, throwing rocks and tearing down parts of the hated fence, while U.S. soldiers and zone police responded with tear gas and gunfire. By the time the violence subsided, about 22 Panamanians and 4 U.S. personnel lay dead, and Panama's streets seethed with anti-American fury. Panama's government severed diplomatic relations with the United States in protest. The world watched as the tiny nation defiantly demanded a new deal. Even a Colombian ambassador visiting the broken border fence angrily likened it to a Berlin Wall in the middle of the Americas. The 1964 flag riots shocked Washington and marked the beginning of the end for the Canal Zone. U.S. President Lyndon Johnson, realizing the old arrangements had become untenable, opened negotiations to ease tensions over the next decade. Panamanian leaders pressed hard for full sovereignty, while some U.S. politicians still vowed never to give away the American-built canal. A turning point came in the 1970s under Panama's nationalist leader, General Omar Torrijos. Torrijos made the canal's return a point of pride and skillfully built international support for Panama's claim. In the U.S., President Jimmy Carter faced intense domestic opposition. Critics warned of lost strategic assets, but he believed ending the colonial-era arrangement was both morally right and geopolitically prudent. In 1977, after tough negotiations, Carter and Torrijos reached a historic agreement. The Torrijos-Carter treaties established a clear timetable for the abolition of the Canal Zone and the transfer of the canal to Panama. One treaty, concerning permanent neutrality, guaranteed the canal would remain open to all nations, but allowed the U.S. the right to defend it if needed. The second treaty, crucially, abolished the Canal Zone on December 31, 1999, and initiated a phased transfer of canal operations to Panama over 20 years. Panamanian sovereignty was finally acknowledged. The Stars and Stripes flag came down in towns like Balboa and Cristobal as Panama's flag was raised, and governance of the zone's lands and people gradually passed to Panamanian authorities. Many Zonians, suddenly seeing their American enclave disappear, felt bitter or displaced. Some departed the isthmus for good, while others stayed on during the transition under new Panamanian administration. For Panama, the treaties were a momentous victory. Though complete control was still 2 decades away, the end of foreign occupation was in sight. Those 2 decades were not without turmoil. General Torrijos died in 1981, and Panama later fell under the dictatorship of Manuel Noriega, leading to further tensions and even a U.S. military invasion in 1989. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Panama and the U.S. adhered to the treaty commitments, working closely together to ensure the canal's smooth operation and transfer. On December 31, 1999, at the stroke of noon, the Panamanian flag was raised over the Panama Canal as the United States formally relinquished authority over the waterway and the surrounding zone lands. In a modest ceremony, officials from both nations marked the end of 96 years of U.S. stewardship. The moment was emotionally charged, a joyful celebration in Panama, and for some Americans, a bittersweet farewell to what they had long seen as their canal. Thus ended the era of the Canal Zone. A century earlier, the U.S. had launched this grand imperial venture, slicing through mountains and jungles to unite the seas, and in the process, planting an American enclave on foreign soil. That venture brought engineering triumph and economic opportunity, but also decades of segregation and simmering resentment. Panama's patience and persistence paid off. By the dawn of the year 2000, the canal was truly Panamanian. Ships still transit the Panama Canal's locks under the tropical sun. Now the sovereign flag flying overhead is Panama's own, a symbol that a long-contested stripe of land has finally returned to its homeland.